good evening and happy BC Day. I'm Veronica Cooper, and what better place to host a special celebrating our beautiful province than right here at our own Royal BC Museum. We've got lots of great stories coming up in the next half hour, but we begin with the mammoth task of creating the current exhibition. 10 semi-trailer trucks filled with components for the Mammoth Exhibition arrived from Toronto in early February, but the planning began much earlier.
The planning stage tends to be 3 to 4 years out. Quite often we're attending trade shows, we're looking at what's out there in the marketplace.
We don't choose exhibitions simply because they're going to be wildly popular, but also things that speak to our own collections and speak to British Columbia specifically. So, for example, Gold Rush is a great example of an exhibition that was both popular, but it was all about BC.
1, 2, 3.
Fast forward to early May. We're now 1 month from opening, but the exhibition is coming together ahead of schedule because all of the components are modular and click together.
Okay, trump's got to go up.
Constructing this creature is a mammoth task.
Okay, there we go.
6 staff members, including one inside the body.
What took us maybe a couple hours to actually set up and put together probably took several months to actually fabricate and build.
Grab the bottom edge. Yep.
And as the weeks pass and the exhibition takes shape, staff excitedly await the centerpiece, Lyuba, a baby woolly mammoth preserved in the frozen Arctic for some 40,000 years.
We were so privileged to be showing Lyuba, the best preserved mammoth in the world, the baby mammoth. And the Russians originally had asked me whether we could display it lying down. That's the way it's normally displayed. But I asked whether we could on this occasion actually show her as if standing up, brought to life. And we've created a special structure that allows us to do that.
Lyuba was found in 2007 in Siberia by a reindeer herder and his sons.
He traveled 400 kilometers to the nearest town to tell about what he found. She was frozen and the ice melted, and they found it just on the surface.
Lyuba alone is worth the price of admission, but there's so much more to see and do at this exhibition, including plenty of interactive fun for youngsters and the young at heart.
This is a really family-focused show, and I think we're going to have a really strong attendance from the local community as well as our summer visitors.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Wow, you guys did it.
And you saw Jack Loman in our story. He joins me now live, CEO of the Royal BC Museum. Jack, Mark Dixon talked about the numbers you were anticipating. How have the numbers been?
Oh, the last 2 months have beyond all expectations, really. Mammoth attendance. And in part, of course, it's due to our wonderful exhibition. In part, it's due to the baby mammoth itself, which is really quite a unique object. And in part because I think the museum is really looking its best. Feedback wonderful, even TripAdvisor, that wonderful gauge of, good visits, is talking in glowing terms.
Fabulous. All right, well, mammoth is still on our mind. We've got another mammoth to show you. Well, not quite a mammoth. You'll see.
Every so often you come across something just cool, and this is really just cool.
This is a hoary marmot skull.
We call it our Mammoth Marmot because he has tusks. And not only does he have tusks, but he has an internal nose piercing.
A remarkable piece in the Royal BC Museum's Natural History collection. How it arrived was somewhat of a mystery.
All we knew about this was that it was put in by a G.V. Copley.
It was catalogued in 1930, and that's where the search began.
So I went back 100 years. I'm looking at the page in February because that was the date I'd been given. And there's this lovely description of a deformed marmot with overgrowth incisors from a Mr. Copley from Fort Graham.
Then it was off to the archives.
And we came across a lovely picture of the fort with a whole bunch of people standing around in front of it.
The photo is dated 1913 and includes Mr. Copley and the man who's believed to have collected the skull, Mr. Ross.
So he found it, gave it to him to bring down to Victoria.
Where is Fort Graham now? It's under Williston Lake in the northern interior, flooded as a result of the Bennett Dam.
It would have been, basically, right around in this area.
This guy was likely found already dead in an alpine area nearby. His extraordinary teeth, a result of a slight misalignment.
The teeth no longer matched, And once that happens, then there's nothing to grind it. So they would just keep growing.
But in spite of their spectacular appearance and what was most certainly considerable discomfort for the marmot,
it can still open and shut its mouth, so it was quite capable of eating. It could have starved to death. It could have just died of old age. It is definitely an adult.
though museum staff don't know everything.
It's serendipity. This critter and me are meant to be. We're meant to find out more about each other.
The mysterious Mammoth Marmot, safely and lovingly preserved at the Royal BC Museum.
Thanks for that, Stacey. Well, we're sticking with the mammoth theme. I'm in the completely refreshed entrance to the Natural History Gallery, where you'll find artifacts, some as tiny as that marmot skull, some, well, an awful lot bigger. This is the skull of an orca. It's also a biological time capsule.
These are animals, you can take DNA from them, you can take tissue samples for stable isotope research. So there's all kinds of fantastic research that can be done just from these carcasses.
Whales are just one species in a remarkably diverse collection.
People bring us window-killed animals, road-killed animals. If they're in very good shape, we keep them.
The museum also keeps tabs on marine mammals found dead on our shores.
Dead animals wash up fairly regularly. If it's a seal here, an otter there, sometimes it's a fish. We've got sea turtles that have been found washed up, and yeah, every now and again someone will come across something large like a whale.
That's what happened when a 9-meter gray whale was found dead on Long Beach near Tofino.
There's a lot of museums around the province, so we have a network of people. We all phone around to see who has the money, who has the time to prepare it. And this one was very fortunate that we were able to pull out some funds to get it done for our collection.
And that's a story in itself.
When you arrive at the beach, you put on gloves and you put on a raincoat, and then they duct tape the gloves to the coat. We were on the beach pulling the fat and the skin, the blubber and the skin off the whale.
If you need to cut it, cut it.
And between 9:30 and 6:30 in the evening, we reduced the animal down to bones and as little meat as possible.
And then the skeleton is taken apart as carefully as possible. Each piece is wrapped, marked, then buried for a year to rot.
And then once it's buried and settled in the ground, bacteria and fungi do the work, and they clean everything off the bones.
Bones to add to a collection which includes nearly every whale from this region.
The whales we lack so far are the fin whale and the North Pacific right whale.
And wouldn't you know it?
Just after the gray whale washed up in April, a fin whale hit the news because it was wrapped around the front of a cruise ship. Had I got a whale looking into the future, I would have said no to the gray whale and yes to the fin whale, because that would have been a real bonus to our collection, but I couldn't afford both.
Of course, the Natural History Gallery, just one of many here at the museum. This is the First Peoples Gallery. And when we come back, we're going to learn how and why this museum was founded 130 years ago. And we'll also look at 2 other monuments in Victoria's Inner Harbour, the BC Legislature and Thunderbird Park. But first, what do you appreciate most about living in BC?
I love British Columbia because it's got so many different areas to it. It's full of mountains, it's got trees, it's got oceans, it's got everything. It's beautiful here.
The hiking, the nature, summertime, there's no better place in the world in the summer.
It's the greatest place in Canada. It's warm, it's temperate climate, no snow in the winter. It's got everything.
Welcome back to our BC Day Special from our very own Provincial Museum, which is 130 years old this year. And if you've ever wondered how or why the museum was founded all those years ago, here's your answer. In the 1870s and 80s, collectors were traveling to the west coast of Canada in search of First Nations cultural objects.
They were purchasing the material in very large numbers and sending it back to Europe, to the States, to Chicago, to Berlin. All of these places have very good collections from British Columbia.
One of the most prolific collectors was a Norwegian man, Philip Jacobsen, who had moved to Bella Coola on BC's Central Coast.
He was selling them, or he was working on consignment for museums. Tons of artifacts and amounts of dollar value, around $10,000, things like that, which was an amazing amount in the 1880s.
some prominent residents of Victoria became very concerned.
And they petitioned to have a museum because they said there's so much of this Indian material, as they called it then, leaving the province. It will never be replaced. It should be here. And their petition was favored, and it led to the creation of this museum.
Named the Provincial Museum of Natural History and Anthropology, one of the first collections to come into the museum was Philip Jacobson's.
So in 1893, the museum purchased, it was a very large purchase at the time, about 220 objects from Philip Jacobson. It is one of the great Central Coast collections. It comes from Bella Bella and Bella Coola. We don't know much else about it, and that's one of the ironies, again, of Philip Jacobson.
Because although he lived in Bella Coola and stated to journalists at that time that he had seen
many, many dances, of First Nations dances, he'd heard oral histories, he knew what the masks were used for because he had experienced that.
And yet the documentation on each piece from his huge collection was usually just a few words.
The intangible part of the tangible objects that are so important to us, and that's kind of information that we would like today.
You can see some of the pieces in the First Peoples Gallery. So that's how the museum was founded all those years ago. Jack Loman joins me again. You've got a big celebration for this 130th year.
October the 25th is the museum's 130th birthday. Hard to think that in 1886 a group of citizens got together to create this extraordinary museum. Unlike almost any other museum in the world, this museum came out of citizens rather than from a wealthy banker or some industrialist. And for that celebration, we're going to be putting out that citizens' petition. We'll also be putting out some of our newest treasures, and we are refreshing the Newcomb Theatre as a new space.
Wow, fabulous. And I know you also have a big contest that you're putting on for all kids aged 5 to 15. Draw, sketch, or paint an Ice Age creature. You can win a flight, 2 nights hotel in Victoria, and VIP passes for that special celebration on October 25th. Click on the links tab on our website for all the details. And speaking of details, here's a detailed story about our BC Legislature.
On February 10, 1898, British Columbia's new Parliament buildings were officially opened in conjunction with the start of a new legislative session.
This is the invitation that was issued.
MLAs, government officials, and the cream of provincial society attended. There were 65 submissions by 62 architects. Well-known Victoria architect Francis Rattenbury won the design competition. His detailed plans showed who went where, including reporters right next to the kitchen. As building costs rose, the Commissioner of Lands suggested Rattenbury cut back on the amount of marble he was using.
Rattenbury put his foot down and emphatically refused and insisted that the Legislative Hall would lose its sense of grandeur and importance, and wouldn't be the same thing if their cheap imitations were used. And he won that battle.
The construction budget was $600,000. Work did not always proceed smoothly as there were labor troubles and contractor concerns, but the government put employment first, deciding the economic benefit justified the extra costs.
Victoria was in a bit of a depression recession. The economy was stagnant. Rattenbury promised to use local labor as much as possible, so anybody who had any skills or was willing to work was hired. It was a real boost to Victoria's economy.
With marble from Tennessee and Italy firmly in place, Lieutenant Governor Tom McInnes used a golden key to formally open the buildings. The final cost was about $1 million. Premier of the day, John Turner, was accused of financial recklessness and lost the election in 1898. He refused to resign, forcing the Lieutenant Governor to dismiss him. The coat of arms above the main entrance was designed by Canon Arthur Beanlands and includes unauthorized use of the royal crest. The official BC coat of arms was not granted until 1987.
So that's the story of how the legislature was built. But what about historic Thunderbird Park right here next to the museum? Well, the park opened in 1941, but it looked very different then than it does now. Victoria's Thunderbird Park opened in 1941, and while it displayed spectacular works from various First Nations, it was anything but authentic.
The things themselves, the objects, were authentic poles and so on, but they were put together just in a jumble. There were houses that had kwak-kwak-kwak designs on the front, supported by Haida roof beams with new channeled poles beside them. It had no relationship to any authentic building.
In 1952, Mungo Martin, a carver from Fort Rupert, was hired by the museum to begin a totem pole preservation program. The older poles were moved inside, and Martin, with the help of his family, made new versions for Thunderbird Park.
In 1953, the house that he built, Wawaditla, the Mungo Martin House, which is currently in the park, was opened with authentic ceremony. And they had two different ceremonies. They had one that was just for First Nations.
And another for the public. The First Nations ceremony was hugely significant.
The opening of Wawaditla in 1953 was the first public potlatch after the ban against the potlatch was dropped from the Indian Act. And it happened, interestingly enough, in Victoria at the museum.
Mungo Martin House is still in use today.
It is used for First Nations cultural ceremonies. People apply to use it, and the applications go to Mungo Martin's descendants in Fort Rupert who approve or disapprove. It's not really up to the museum. We just process it.
Martin was 72 years old when he accepted the challenge to redesign the park, a vital contribution to the growing city of Victoria.
He was a real bridge between the colonial, non-Aboriginal populations and the First Nations cultures,
spreading education and understanding about the rich culture of the First Nation population. Amazing to learn what goes on behind the scenes at the museum. And speaking of behind the scenes, I'm deep in the archives painting vault. And when we come back after the break, we're going to learn more about this woman, Emily Carr, and someone else pretty close to the hearts of British Columbians.
Do you think Skelly's doing any kind of a job at all?
But first, more of what you appreciate most about our province.
The sense of community. There's a kind of acceptance of different people's ways of being in the world that doesn't exist as much in the East from where I'm from.
The environmental consciousness of the people that live here.
Just being able to go to the beach, go to the mountain, go for a hike in like less than 2 hours. You're in the most beautiful place away from the city.
The green and the variety of like mountains and ocean and lakes and rivers and just you name it. It's just phenomenal. Best place.
Welcome back to our BC Day Special from right here at the Royal BC Museum and Archives, which is where I am now, and where they're hard at work preserving a unique and colorful piece of our history. Here's Stacey Burrows.
Jack Webster, one of the most iconic of Canadian broadcasters.
You want a chance to say your piece about what you regard as an invasion of your lands.
At the Royal BC Museum Archives, the race is on to preserve some of his best work.
Why are you so chubby when you are a famous nutritional expert?
He always asked the tough questions.
Do you think Skelly's doing any kind of a job at all? Or is he bound to fall on his face?
He felt that his job was to hold politicians accountable to the people that they serve.
They can't sell the lumber we produce now.
You're not going to give them that much anyway. But
Webster was on the air from 1978 to 1987, and all 1,150 episodes were recorded on 3/4-inch magnetic videotapes.
And all magnetic media dies over time.
These are at the end of their lifespan, and soon all the images and sounds will be lost and inaccessible.
The tapes can no longer be played because you can't find a machine to play it. So even if you have tapes in perfect condition, you may not be able to play it and see the content.
Nevertheless.
So bit by bit, 350 episodes, conversations, controversies, and characters are being shipped off to a lab and digitized.
As a legacy,
they speak very much to the 80s. People are mostly used to how bright and sharp all of the images they see on television are, and they're older, and that's just the way it is, but they look good. So we got the lineup sheets.
Why is this kind of preservation important?
They go on to talk about secondhand smoke.
Because some of the issues relevant then are equally as relevant today.
Grace McCarthy, he asked her point blank, do teachers have the right to strike?
Really?
Yep, he asked her, and she answers.
Should school teachers have the right to strike?
I don't believe that school teachers should have the right to strike.
We're preserving this for future generations, and whenever I mention Jack Webster's name, people get really excited.
We're making progress, but a cure has not yet been found.
A cure has not been found.
Jack Webster died in 1999, but at least some of his considerable legacy has been preserved and will be remembered as part of our history.
Now, Jack Webster is certainly part of BC's history, but it's Emily Carr who really put this province on the map by capturing so much of it on canvas.
Emily Carr is sometimes called the 8th of Canada's group of 7. She was born 141 years ago this week. There are 1,200 paintings and sketches by Emily Carr at the Royal BC Museum. Some signed M. Carr. She was also known as Millie Emily Carr. Her father, Richard Carr, wrote in his diary, Emily Carr, born December 13th, 5:54 a.m. in Victoria, 1871.
Richard Carr's papers are part of the BC Archives collection. He was an important merchant in Victoria, and he was very successful in the California Gold Rush, which helped the family with their move to Victoria.
Before the Carrs moved to Victoria, they lived alternately in England and California. The Carrs had 9 children, 5 girls, 4 boys. The baby boys died except for one who lived to 24. But the 5 sisters lived beyond, and Emily to 73.
In 1888, this photograph was taken of the 5 Carr sisters. Here's Emily, age 16 or 17, the artist. Here's her sister Alice, school teacher in James Bay. Here is Lizzie, physiotherapist and masseuse. Edith, who kept everybody in line and was a founding member of the YWCA here in Victoria. And the sister Clara, who married a major in the Royal Engineers and was the only one of the sisters to have children. She had 5, and she's buried in Vancouver.
In 1863, the Carrs bought 4 acres in James Bay and built a house. Meanwhile, Emily Carr studied art in Canada, the US, England, and France. She suffered from bad health and could be difficult.
It depended on whether you'd take her on her own terms or not. Some people found her gruff and difficult to get along with. Artists found her a good close friend, and she had a very small, compact circle of friends and neighbors within the community.
Carr was as much an author as a painter and published numerous books. She had beloved pets, a monkey, parrot, dogs, and cats. Emily Carr died in Victoria in 1945.
Thanks for that, Bruce. You know, we may have lost her in 1945, but she's remembered right here next to the Royal BC Museum. Thanks for watching, and from all of us at CHEK, happy BC Day.